Hello, everybody. Dr. Jack Lee is the North Shore University Health System Board of Directors Ivan Chirek, MD, Chair of Neurosciences. Dr. Lee attended Yale University, receiving his undergraduate degree in psychology in 1978. He continued his studies at the University of Illinois, Chicago, earning his PhD in physiology and biophysics in 1983 and MD in 1988. He trained as a resident in anatomic pathology and fellow in neuropathology in Boston at Massachusetts General Hospital, Harvard Medical School. In 1992, he went to Loyola University Medical Center, where he held many leadership positions there, including chairman of pathology, vice president of Loyola University Medical Center, and dean of the Stritch School of Medicine. Recruited to North Shore University Health System in 2013, he has established a brain bank for neurodegenerative disease and traumatic brain injury. He has served as the residency program director and the vice chairman for research and education in the Department of Pathology. Currently, Dr. Lee is a clinical professor at University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine and a member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, as well as the American Association of Neuropathologists. Since 2018, he is the editor-in-chief for the Journal of Neuropathology and Experimental Neurology. Over the years, he has written, lectured, and conducted research on the neuropathology and clinical drug development for Alzheimer's disease, as well as on traumatic brain injury, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and has published over 125 articles and book chapters. Thank you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you for that introduction. So to share my, where do I share again? Oh, here we go. I'm going to share my presentation. Can you see it? Everything?
Yes, we can see it. Yes.
That's great.
Good. Well, thank you all for attending the session today, and I have the pleasure, and I'm very honored to be giving this presentation on the aspects of publication and regarding the journal JNEN. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm very honored to be the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Neuropathology and Experimental Neurology for the association. And what I'd like to do over the next hour or so is these are my disclosures. I have worked on drug development for Alzheimer's disease with a company, Cornelli Consulting, and I also am a member of the scientific advisory board for Caremark Pharmaca Limited as well. But none of the things I'm going to be talking about in relation to the journal have anything to do with these disclosures. What I'd like to do is give you some overview of what's going on in the publishing world, particularly on the issues regarding open access and our relationship with Oxford University Press and what's going on internationally. I'd also like to give you an idea of how we interpret the numbers, if you will, the impact factor and other metrics that are coming along in terms of how we analyze publications, and our journal included. And at the end, I'd like to kind of give you an idea of an overview of how, when I get papers and how we edit them, how best to submit them to get the best reviews in a timely manner. And so I'll give you some bullet points or pearls into how to submit a manuscript, not only for our journal, but for others in the field. So what I'd like to do is kind of give you a running start on editor-in-chief's report that I gave at the June meeting. Some of you may have attended the business meeting, some of you may not have, but this gives me an ability to give you an overview of what's going on with AANP, or with the journal JNEN, in relation to AANP, and to give you some numbers, some metrics from which we can then go on to discuss some of the specifics of where the field is. As I reported, our manuscripts are holding steady over the past few years in the high 200s. About 30%, though, or 20 to 30% are about not in scope. We get a number of articles that are really outside the scope of neuropathology and experimental neurology. And our breakdown is about 10% rejection on original submissions, The majority though, are either a revision with a resubmission or a reject with resubmission. Our overall acceptance rate is in the 40% range after we account for the not in scopes. This is an important slide for me as the editor-in-chief. You can see how many people I invite for reviews. You can also see how many accept and or decline. What I'm showing here is I get a lot of people, in terms of trying to find reviewers for each of the articles. It can be difficult. People are very busy, but also this is an area where when I do invite people, if you can't review, please give me a suggestion of someone in the field who can. So as I'm going through these numbers, I'm going to also kind of direct you or kind of like talk about some of the issues that I deal with as an editor-in-chief. In general, it takes about 12 days to complete the review once people have accepted. And I'll have some more demographics on the real timeline but the average days to submission to first decision is about 18 days. And it's down from a high earlier in 2019 of about 26 days. So we try to get them done as quickly as possible. Now, this is one of the issues that in the field right now that giving you some of the demographics over where we have been from 2017 to 2022. Majority, from the United States, Europe, and Australia. And those are our bulk of our submissions from that time frame. Canada, Japan, and China, and the acceptance rates, as you can see for the different areas. The United States and Europe are on the 50%. China is lower, and the amount of submissions, as you can see, was 490. What I have noticed since January, the past year, has been a big uptick in the amount of papers that we have gotten from China. It's over 50% of the submissions over the past since the beginning of the year, the end of last year. And it's really quite extensive. They're closer to 50% of our submissions recently. And this has been well documented in Science Magazine and other big journals talking about how China is really one of the major submitters to journals, not just our journal, but journals in general, and they become one of the highest cited manuscripts come from China. So this is an area that we're all the journals in the neurosciences, but in particular around, even from Oxford, is telling me that other journals have the same uptick from the China submissions. I'll deal with that. I'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about some of the specifics of the journal. But I also wanted to let you know that we have in the middle of a 5-year contract with Oxford University Press. We're over 7 years in, and we renegotiated a contract a few years ago, and we had $90,000 re-signing bonus, and over the course of the 5 years, a net projected guaranteed and projected revenues and royalties of a little over $1 million. Recently, we've been keeping on track of our royalties and payments to JNEN, and our contract with Oxford has been very good and lucrative. And over the years, with Mike Hart and as well as Ray Sobel, and with my tenure, the JNEN currently has assets in AANP of over $3 million currently as of this date. So we've been, the journal has been very successful, and as well and has the assets in AANP for investment as well as use. And that's another thing that I'll be talking to you about going forward, about how to use these funds and the assets that the journal has given to the association, but on being able to help the association as well. So over the past few years, this has been our impact factor. We've been with Oxford 7.5 years, but our impact factor, and I'll show you what our new impact factor was in 2022 for the thing. It's uptick a bit, but we've been holding steady or in the threes for the impact factor. And I'll go over in some detail what that means in relation to other journals and the like. Again, the days to receipt of publication to online. So once we've basically accepted a manuscript, it goes online within 2 weeks. So we don't have to wait for not only the print journal, but we can get online within 2 weeks after acceptance. So that's a pretty good number in terms of the different publication firms in terms of getting it published, your papers. So open access, and we'll talk about this going forward. About right now, over the past 3 years, about 10 to 12% of our articles are open access, and this is an area where we would like to increase. And for the journal of JNEN, actually open access has increased the amount of citations over the past year or two, and I'll show you some data of that and the reason why we want to go to more open access, and we have the funds to be able to do that for our association. I want to emphasize the fact that the journal is a flagship journal for our association. It really does represent us to the not only the nation but internationally. And just to remind you that as members we do have page charges are waived. I'm trying to get directed letters, for people to submit abstracts, and I'm going to be talking about submission, a call for papers from our membership at the end of my talk right now. But just remember that for AANP, we are the flagship journal for the association. I'm continuing to send out emails regarding what is in the journal each month. I used to send them out quarterly, but now I'm going to be sending them out every month, just to remind you that of what are main articles from some of our association members and main articles from international groups that are publishing with us. Still, and recruiting articles, particularly on relevant review articles on new technology, and informatics has been big. We've had a number of articles recently on informatics that have been published, and that certainly is the hot area in publishing in general, and we've been had some good publications recently. We publish also what every neuropathologist needs to know in the JANE over the past few years, and these articles are very, as we know from the meetings, are very practical, but also when we get them published, they actually are some of the best cited papers because they do have practical knowledge in them, and people use them, and they're well cited, and I've gotten got very good comments about them. So we're going to continue to do that. I know Ken Aldape is working on the one for the methylation with us for the meeting from last June. We also, as the journal, we meet, the editorial board, we meet for thanking people on the Saturday morning, but also the senior associate editors, we meet every year at the meeting. We had our meeting in June where we plan out proposals and strategic planning going forward, and I'll summarize some of the meeting minutes and what we've decided to do for this year in the next part of my talk. So our continuing areas are to continue to work with the finance committee. We've moved all of the assets and the money from the JNEN over into AANP for investment and use purposes, and so we've completed that this past year. We're also coordinating with the website committee to get information out. Also with Oxford, we have a number with marketing, and I'll show you the marketing report that we have with Oxford to try to get exposure of the journal and the association out through these virtual Neuro Hub journals that they put out, and I'll show you some of the data on the recent neuro-oncology articles that were referenced. Each week I get and I can actually every day I can go in and look at the JNEN altmetric scores and for how we're looked at with Twitter, as with Facebook, as well as how articles are being talked about in social media. Find it very interesting. I can find other articles, and getting into following people's Twitter accounts are very interesting, going down a few levels and before I get to the dog pictures or whatever, but it's I find some interesting discussion. Most of the things that I see on the references on social media are, please, this was an article that was published, not a lot of comments, but it's interesting to see some of the comments that are out there and looking at how we're looked at in terms of a metric of altmetric scores. We're continuing with Oxford to market JNEN, and I'll show you some of our marketing reports going forward. And then I reported at the meeting that for last year, we are on track to have 15 articles that we as an association will fund for open access, and we would like to propose, and probably going forward, doubling that to 30 articles in this coming year. And I'll show you data that having open access just in general for the field of publishing is where things are going. And also the fact that for JNEN, for our association and our journal, actually having open access has increased the ability to get cited and out into the publishing world. So this is data that was not necessarily presented at the meeting, but this is our publisher's report, and I want to give you kind of an overview of how, when you're dealing with a publishing firm in Oxford, how we as an association journal interact with a publishing firm. Oxford has been in existence for over 500 years. They are, an academic, non-for-profit organization that deals with publishing many, many journals, and JNN is one of them. We have a very good working relationship with Catherine Lavelle, our publisher. We meet regularly. She's very responsive, and at the meeting, at the noon meeting that we had as the associate editors, we went over some of the big demographics, and this will give you an idea of how the JNEN fits in with overall publishing from an academic point of view. Particularly, institutional subscriptions are the major places where royalties and exposure are done, and so we've held pretty steady in terms of the collections from JNEN in Oxford for both the collection as well as the conventional areas of academic for institutions. A little bit of a dip. There have been some, and as you know, each university these days is dealing with their own library issues and what they can and cannot publish, and so there is an ever increasing change in how university libraries, and so the conventional academic is always a challenge for any publishing firm, but holding fairly steady in that area. This is just to give you an idea of visit content. We've held pretty steady over the years in terms of Oxford has been able to look at how much full text downloads that people have been given for the JNEN, and they've been holding pretty steady in terms of engagement. Most of the engagement, as you can tell here, is from North America and Europe. In terms of where we, people who access our journal, Southeast Asia and Asia as well. But this is where most of the engagement comes from for the journal. And this is an interesting slide in the sense of how do people get to us? So 2021 is in the maroon, and the blue is in 2022. So Google is still the major way that people access the journal. The direct access is really through our site, our JNEN site, and the directly to the journal, the Oxford University Press site, directly coming to the journal site. Interestingly, PubMed and Google Scholar make up about 10% of how the engagement of how the journal is accessed. What's interesting, and we never kind of get a straight answer out of the fact that Facebook and Twitter, although there's a lot of altmetrics, I go in and see that Twitter people do reference and do talk about the journal. The question is, do they access it directly? Do people on Twitter go to Google and then access it, or how do they link? But Facebook and Twitter are not our, quote, according to this demographics from Oxford, not the major way we get exposure. But it may be indirectly that through Twitter or Facebook, they go to Google, and that's, you're back to the top of the slide here, that's how they get to us. And we can't quite get a handle on the linkage on that from Oxford's, but that may be one reason. It's unusual. I mean, but just these are the numbers that they generate from a direct Twitter and direct Facebook and Bing and the like. So what are the top articles that have been cited all time for the journal? And this gives you a historical perspective as well as recent perspective. There's been a number of articles over the past few years that have been some of the most cited, but the top of the list is Ann McKee's paper on CTE, to a way not surprising in a way, given the fact that it's such a major area of inquiry even to this day. But the top 10 articles, but we can see here that other articles in the past recent years on COVID particularly, and on some of the ALS on the serine model in 2020, 2018, we had a Lewy body, and connecting to traumatic encephalopathy. I will say in general, some of our major references that we get are in the neurodegenerative field. That's been one of the mainstays of the highlights of the journal. Pediatrics and neuropathology of neurodegeneration are some of the major areas, and tumors are important too, and we'd like to increase that. But in general, neurodegenerative diseases are some of the major citations over the years in the journal. Here are the last top 10 articles from the last 12 months. And just cited in the past 12 months. So they include articles from before, from Ann McKee's paper on CTE. And again, some of the, there's kind of down the list, a little further down, what every pathologist needs to know. The muscle biopsy one is still very well cited from 2020. Again, the COVID paper from 2022. Are been very well cited, and again, what every pathologist needs to know is a good venue in general for us to get good citations. So here's the impact factor, the trends over the past 10 years or so. We've been holding steady in the threes, except for the dip in 2019. And this is an area where we certainly were competing with a number of neuroscience journals across the field. There's been an increase in the number of journals, but these are the numbers. And I'll go into detail now a little bit on the 2022 impact factors. So this just came out since the meeting, where they're now going to, it's an uptick, a small uptick, that a significant uptick in the marginal uptick in impact factor to 3.2. They're no longer reporting out to 2, 3, 4 digits on the impact factor. It goes to 1 decimal place after the decimal place of 3.2. And it's a simple metric, but this is how it's done. So basically, you take the total number of of items published, and you look at the number of citations versus the number of citable papers. So we published 122 articles that were citable in 2020 and 93 in 2021. We've switched over. We're no longer, the brief reports are articles. So right now, the amount of citable articles was 215 over the years 2020 to 2021. We had 686 citations. That makes it an impact factor of 3.2. So it's a fairly simple, straightforward statistic based upon the number of articles that are deemed citable. And that's how it's done. There's a lot of debates on what that means in terms of overall significance, but that's the number and how it's calculated and what everyone looks at. So the top 10 cited articles for the 2000 that affected the 2021, the last impact factor were these articles. Looking at you can see here, there was some pediatric cases, number 2. We had some tumor papers. Again, the neurodegenerative field is well represented from the Alzheimer's and TDP, limbic, the late papers. So this was what impacted our Hannah Kinney's paper on the serotonin hypothesis on sudden death was in the 2021 impact factor. So it kind of gives you a breadth or an idea of where our citations are coming from. Like to get more tumor papers. Tumors are represented in the third one here in 2021, and the glioblastoma was down. But again, the mainstay is neurodegenerative diseases and pediatrics. The most recent articles cited in this impact factor were the second consensus conference for CTE, which was a very good paper, and it makes sense that for CTE, and as you noticed, Ann McKee's lab and the group, but the consensus conference, which were made up of a number of our members of the association, published the consensus for CTE, and it was one of our highest cited publications and a good representation for our society. So, and then the limbic encephalitis, or limbic predominant age-related late and clinical associations, Peter Nelson's group, and then neurodegenerative articles number 3 on the review article on eukaryotic factor alpha 2 alpha. So but you can see here in general, it's a tumor one was down the list here, but it's mostly neurodegenerative papers that get our, and CTE that get our citations, which is important. So the 5-year impact factor is, you can see here across the board, is holding steady in the 3s. And again, the impact factor is basically the number of citations over the number of citable items in terms of review articles, and primarily review articles and regular articles. And that's how the impact factor is calculated. So if you break it down of where the influence of the impact factor are, and you can see here that the review articles really can drive or at least increase the amount of citations, 4.4 for the impact factor in 2020, 4.1 in 2021. Our articles are also some of the areas where we get the impact factor. Letters to the editor, at least in these 2 years, not a major contribution. And the abstracts are really not citable items. I just wanted to, we put this in here to remember that we had a number of, we had an increase in the amount of, the abstracts are published in the journal, but they're not citable, even though you can reference them because they are in the journal under the issue number. So where are the citations by corresponding authors? Where are they coming from? North America and Europe are major areas where the authors are cited for impact factor. Southeast Asia and East Asia and China, although they contributed to impact factor, not as much as North America and Europe. And Oceania, I just wanted to remind you, is Australia and New Zealand and the islands in the South Pacific there. The impact factor is good. And this is where the citations that affect the impact factor are coming from an international breakdown point of view. So now this is an interesting, we got a report from Oxford through Clarivant that they kind of break down where the journal citations come from. So this, if you read here, this is the top 20 journals citing us, citing our paper, our papers. And what was interesting is that the International Journal of Molecular Science, this big purple area, was probably the most in terms of citing us, our journal, in their journal. ACTA is here, and our journal, we cite our, in terms of self-citations here, is 190, is a smaller piece of the puzzle, but this gives you the breadth of where our papers are being cited. Journal of Alzheimer's Disease here, Brain Journal here, ACTA Neuropathologica here, ACTA Neuropath Communications here, to kind of give you an idea of where the journal is being cited. But interestingly, the International Journal of Molecular Science is one of the major places where our journal is cited. Now, the reverse here, kind of a different twist, is the top 10 journals cited by the JNEN. In other words, of when we publish articles, what journals do we cite? And the ACTA is ACTA Neuropathologica and JNEN ourselves are the top two. Neurology is next, and then Brain. But it kind of gives you a breakdown of where the journals cited by JNEN, who we cite in the articles, to kind of give you a breakdown of the citations. So journal rankings are important, but it gives you an idea of the breadth. Look at how many different journals are out there in the different areas. Journals of clinical neurology, 212 that are monitored. Neurosciences has 272, and pathology journals, there's 76 pathology journals. So we're dealing, I mean, if you look at the whole list of how many journals are out there, and even in particular our own area, it's really quite astonishing how many are out there. But these are our rankings. 100 out of 212, we're up a bit from last year of 122. So we're about the same in the neurosciences, 151, but we've had an uptick in the rankings in the pathology journals from last year. So overall, a small bump in the impact factor and some increase in the journal rankings from overall the amount of journals that are ranked in our particular fields, neurology, neuroscience, and pathology, of where we are. So, we talk about, that's kind of the published report. Now I'm going to try to get into an area of kind of understanding some of the metrics and alternative metrics that people have been talking about whether or not impact factor is the best measurement, or how we go about looking at, when people say, oh, we want to publish in a, for promotion, how we want to publish in a journal that has a high impact factor in terms of my promotion or whatever. Well, what's happening over the past few years is this H factor or H index is becoming a little bit more prominent, particularly through Google Scholar. And I sit on the promotions committee for the University of Chicago for our members of North Shore, our health system here. And H factors, this H index is becoming a bit more cited when people are going up for promotion. And it's in relation to journals with impact factor. But what does an H index mean? Because not only do you get an individual H index for you as an individual, but the journals are also getting an H index factor. So let's talk just a bit about what an H index is. It was originally started by a theoretical physicist, Jorge Hirsch, who was trying to look at the relative worth of the theoretical physicist quality of the papers. And so he was trying to look at an index, and it was really a factor of the number of publications over the years, and then used a derived function, and it's a calculus function that kind of looks at relative median citations, and it's a fairly not fairly well derived, it's a fairly somewhat complex like calculus that he used for a derived function, but looking at the number of publications in relation to a derived functions of the citations per article. So certainly if you publish more articles over the years, it does affect your H index, but it also looks at the amount of which articles get cited more in terms of the median. So the bottom line is Google Scholar or whatever, you can confirm, you can do an H index of your personal, this is a personal H index. So over a 20-year career, a 20 would be an H index of the number of publications in relation to the number of citations in this formula. A 20 would be considered successful. A 30 would be very good. A 40 is outstanding, and a 60 is truly exceptional. Interestingly, in looking at some of the data from this reference, is that if you look at the median H index for the National Academy of Science members, a 57 is the median number for that. And the Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Baltimore, regarding the HIV and all his work was a 191, which is, some of the Nobel Prize winners are in the hundreds or whatever. But this gives you an idea of what an H factor is. And again, I'm seeing it. We're all seeing, we're all possibly doing a Google Scholar H index, and so this gives you an idea of what that means. So an H index was generated for the journal. The journal too can have an H index, and it can be designated to create a simpler way to represent the quality. I guess there's always debates about impact factor, whether or not that's the best way to do it, or is this a better handle on trying to normalize the citations and the number of articles that people or journals or people have done over time. While it's still a very popular ranking for journals, the H index is good for maybe individual authors, but the journal index, H index, is a 36, calculated from this year, 2022. And so journal H index is pretty good, from very good to the outstanding category. So that's what our number is right now in terms of an H index. And it'd be interesting to see how this number will influence things going forward, but it's a number. And probably impact factor is still not going to go away, but it gives you an idea when people are going up for promotion. One of the things that we want to say, well, people publishing is important, but also looking at an H index is also a complementary metric. So let's deal with open access. This is an important area in the field in general, not just for JNEN, but for all of us in terms of the open access issue. This guy was telling you about 15% or 12% of our articles are open access, and this is what they've been. We're a hybrid journal with Oxford, so any article can be open access. Certainly, the bottom line is open access, it sounds open access, true, but it's not free. Someone's got to pay. There's got to be some revenue source for where the open access comes from, either from the individual authors or in associations or consortium like they have in Europe. But the bottom line is we have about 10% of our, 12% of our articles are open access right now. So what does open access mean in terms of free publication right away, in terms of people being able to access it, not going through their institutions, not going through any of the associations or publishing firms. So Oxford has told us in general, when they have looked at all of their articles, and we meet I have a meeting every year in Raleigh or in someplace east where the Oxford has what's called Editors' Day, where they kind of talk about publications in general. And when they've looked at open access from across all of their journals, they can't necessarily find there's a relationship between open access and citation, but it's not proven significant overall for a number of journals. And on a large scale cross publishing, contrary to what you would think, is that there's not a one-to-one necessarily on a large scale. However, I had them break down for our journal the articles that we have published in open access. And you can see here that the amount of articles in open access, our citations went from 3 to 4 on the median, review articles from 4 to 6, and all citables did go up a bit. So at least on this small cohort of what we've looked at over those particular years, the open access for JNEN for our articles have actually been helpful. Just to give you an idea, in general, this is not in general, open access average cost without discounts is about $3,000 for not just JNEN, but other journals across the international spectrum. So again, open access it sounds, yeah, we all want to have the open access, but at some point there's cost involved, and this is what the costs on average are, not just for JNEN. So open access, in the European area, the consortiums of the European Union and whatever have had consortiums where they've funded a number of particularly in Europe, the papers that will be able to publish in open access. The United States, there's individual universities that have gone to supporting open access for their individual investigators, but the United States and Canada are really behind in overall trying to support or mandate even open access. However, last August, from the Office of the President, the Office of the Executive Office on Science and Technology has put out a memo stating that as of December 31st, 2025, so a few years from now, that all NIH and nationally sponsored, not only NIH, National Science Foundation, will all have to be open access. And right now, according to the Oxford University Press and the like, they're working on the logistics of how there's going to be the coordination right here, number 3, of how the federally funded research results to coordinate the procedure as well as the funding of these papers for open access. So it's a work in progress, and I'm sure you've heard about it, but by the end of 2025, we've got to be there. So just quick marketing issues. This is the Med Hub, the neuro-oncology. We had some good publications from that neuro-oncology area. I mentioned the social media things about Twitter, but in the interest of time, I'll go over that. What I'd like to do now is kind of give you, in the next few minutes, kind of some pearls that I, as editor-in-chief, would like you to look at when you're publishing your articles in terms of how you submit them. So these are quick pearls, and I've bolded some of the things that I think are important to you or should be important. is that the title is first impression and should really deal with the general area and give you intermediate referring to a specific disease and referring to specific tests in your first title. Take time to look at your title. That's how things are indexed, and avoid abbreviations, please. It's just hard to index things. So your introduction, the next area, should define the aim and the study with the study question using active verbs. That's very helpful. And it should not make up more than 10 to 15%. I've seen a number of introductions that are quite, it takes a long time before you even get to the results. So you should have an introduction that is fairly straightforward, to the point, with the aims and of the study using active verbs. And at the end, the last sentence or so should say what you're going to do. And it should only make about 20% or 10 to 15% of your paper. In the methods, the bottom line is that you as a researcher should know, if you wanted to replicate this study, what in the methods should be in there for them to know that they can be able to get the right information to be able to replicate the study. So when you're writing your methods and you're saying, well, let's look at it, please give or reference to a methodology paper that someone can replicate, like having the right antibody. If you're going to say you're going to cite another antibody from another paper, make sure that the reference is there so they can go look up which antibody you used, so that they can be able to replicate what you did. This last paragraph is really important from an post-editing point of view. Well, we send back articles a lot of times where they're not, the generic names and brand names are not mentioned. And then where the companies for all and country from where your reagents are used. Again, gets back to the top paragraph here. People have got to replicate what you do, and reagents and what you used, the names of the company and where the reagents are used. I would say a lot of times Eileen has to send back to the authors to make sure you put the names of the company. It's going to save us some time there. Statistical analysis. This is really important. I would say that a number of papers I've had to send to some of our reviewers are statisticians. If you do this up front, have a biostatistician, particularly on clinical papers, have them as authors, is really important. I think a lot of the reviews that come back aren't so much on the basic science papers for t-tests and 2AA novas. It really is on some of the more complicated clinical papers, or some of the more detailed papers where you're going back and forth between basic science and clinical areas, where the biostatistics is very important. I have a few biostatisticians that I use as my backups or people who, when this comes up, but coordination with the biostatistics is very important, and having them as an author. I've sent back a paper or two recently where the people have included biostatisticians on the revision. So this is something that I think is very important. The results section, the bottom line is good practice to mention the study groups, and then in reference to the control. Don't put superlatives in, like markedly increased, or some other type of increase. Just no adjectives. The data is the data. Just do your significance. So in terms of reviews, in terms of looking at papers, adjectives in the results section, superlatives and diminutives are really not necessary. This is an important area too in the discussion. what I get from reviewers, and also when I review as editor-in-chief, the main thing is you got to know, or someone in your paper, you should note the strengths and weaknesses at the end in your discussion paragraph, and also include the implications of, all right, you've done the paper, what's the strengths and weaknesses, what's the next experiment, or what's the next area. That's a thing that we get back from reviewers quite a few, is, you know, they overstate their paper and they don't mention their weaknesses. And so the paper, you should always have a paper that has a good paper will have a good discussion in their discussion section of the strengths and weaknesses and implications for future research. The section should end with 1 or 2 sentences with the main conclusions and the findings and the context of the field. But I would say the bold, what I have here, is real important. Really include a strength and weakness of your studies. And when I look at the papers, just from general things, when I have to make a decision on the paper, if they've got split reviews, knowing what the strengths, what you as an author think the strengths and weaknesses are real important in terms of where you think the field should go with that. I've underlined it, bold, and italicized this reference issue. We do send a lot of manuscripts back. Please follow the directions of how we want you to cite the paper. The sad part is, or the good and the bad is that this is idiosyncratic for every journal. So whenever for JNEN we have our specific methodology, you really should pay attention to that. So we send a lot of the post editing is in getting the references cited in the right ways and the way we want for the journal. So if you could pay attention to that. That's, I'm not saying that just for us. I think probably every other journal has the same issue. And the bad part is that each journal has a different idiosyncratic method for how they do it, which is good and bad. So, but it is the reality. Conflicts of interest are always important. Comes up sometimes. It's better to declare anything, and then we can make the decision, or you can make the decision whether or not it's significant or not. But declare any conflict of interest relative to the manuscript, and this is an important area just in general going forward. They may have negligible, but they can have significant impact. And I think that anybody reading the paper should know what your companies and or affiliations are. And if it's not clear to me, I certainly will let you know. The other thing, the letter that you send to me as the editor, it's very helpful to delineate the bullet points and the significance of the contribution, strengths and weaknesses. Don't try to reiterate the abstract. I can read the abstract, but if you tell me what's important, then I can get a better idea when I get split reviews or whatever. That's helpful. And this is very helpful too as an editor-in-chief. Very helpful to submit full names and email addresses of potential reviewers if you can't review. So revisions are important to take into consideration all the comments of the reviewers and respond individually to each of the comments of the reviewers. When you give the letter a different color for what the reviewer wanted and what you changed, it's easier to read when we're doing that. The bottom line here is I want you to look at the total number of submissions to publication in advance. Publications from submission is 82 days, which is pretty good, which I think is really a very good number. We're developing a conditional acceptance decision to kind of move things along right now. The strategic plan, I think at this point, I would just like to say that we're looking for using the assets that we have Eddie Lee has set up a committee that looked at strategic planning, and we're looking for ways of using the total assets for the journal. And I think that's points for discussion coming up. And I think this is, I'd like to end on this, because I think I'm going to be sending out an email to the association tomorrow. You'll get it. Is that I'd like to emphasize that the GNEN is the association's journal, and our editorial board is made up of your peers. And I have noticed with the increase in the amount of, or decrease in the amount of submissions from our members since the beginning of the year. And I'd like to call for, papers to celebrate the 100th anniversary of our association, and encourage you to submit at least an article a year. Remember, it's a reflection on our association, and we have waived paid charges, and we're trying to get to more open access, as I mentioned. Going forward, we have the funds to be able to do that, but a real call for papers from our association. And with that, I'd like to thank Ray Sobel, particularly as my deputy area editor, and Eileen Healy, who does the bulk of the work and the post-production. Without these two individuals, my job would be almost impossible. They do a great job. And my senior associate and associate editors for helping me out on the journal on a daily basis, and giving me good input. So on that note, I'd like to end and take any questions.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lee. At this time, we'll move into Q&A. You may submit your questions via the chat box or unmute to ask a question. When submitting a question via the chat, please ensure the message is to everyone so that the presenters and attendees are able to see the question. To unmute, select the microphone in the lower left corner. And once you've asked your question, please remute to avoid background noise. So I have a question from Murat Gaktin. Thank you for this informative talk. How does name placement and author lineup factor in, if any, in the H factor?
The H factor in terms of where you are in the publication line, I don't think that's part of the algorithm, but I can check. I think it's just the amount of publications and an algorithm of it's cited in terms of its median. I don't think that but I can check that, but I don't think it takes into account first or last author, as I recall.
Okay. And then Mark Del Biggio asks, regarding invitations to review, what is the acceptance rate by people on the editorial board?
Oh, in terms of the editorial board, in terms of people accepting reviews, for the most part, it's very good. I would say 80% of the people accept, and if they don't, I usually get a good reference. The editorial board has been, for the most part, 80%, pretty good. Sometimes I, have to ask a few times, but and the good news is, for the most part, for the people on the editorial board, they usually will tell me that they're busy, which is good. But I would just reiterate, if you can't review, if you're a member of the editorial board, or in general, even if you're not, and I ask you to review, if you could suggest a person that you think in the field, an expert, it would be very helpful on my part. Trying to find reviewers, I spend my evening, that's what I do, and looking. So that would be very helpful. But thanks for your question.
Okay. And then I don't see any more questions if anyone would like to unmute. Otherwise, I think I'm going to ask a question. I'm not sure it's really right for this journal, but I know sometimes journals accept what I would call kind of opinion papers that don't really have true data, true numbers. Does the AANP, does our journal accept those opinion papers? And in order to submit one, do you have to have had a previous, scientific paper?
Yeah. Well, that's part of one of the discussion. We were talking about white papers, and we were talking about, opinions about whether or not, practice papers. That's a little bit more detailed. That would be based on data. Yeah, opinion papers, it would probably be more of like a meta-analysis type of papers we would accept. I certainly, if someone is considering an opinion paper, I think a letter to me directly about how to format it and what I would like, or what we would direct you to, would be important. So opinions would have to be based upon the existing data, probably more on the meta-analysis, or or controversial areas that have been well established that we can reference, that the opinion would be based on. Yeah, but yes, I would consider that, or we would consider that.
Okay. And then the last, I do believe we're out of time, but this was a fantastic presentation. I loved every minute of it. And I think we're out of time.
Thank you, Dr. Oviedo.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Dr.
for
Lee.
the opportunity.
Thank you again. Thank you again to everyone for joining today's AANP Teaching Rounds presentation. We would ask that you take a few minutes to complete a short evaluation, as completion helps ensure accurate reporting to the accreditation board. A link to the evaluation will appear on your Path LMS screen upon the conclusion of the Zoom meeting, or you can navigate back to the main course and select the evaluation option. Once you've completed the evaluation and selected your credit amount, please then select the appropriate certificate based on your credentials. The PowerPoint slides and recording will be posted to the AANP website within the next week. And thank you once again to Dr. Lee for an excellent presentation. This concludes the session for today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.